Okay, who can name where this phrase comes from? And I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling kids. Anyone? Scooby-Doo, right? My name is Nate Carter, and on today's Cornerstone Connection, we have a very similar scene to what happens at the end of every Scooby-Doo episode. Now, if you've watched it, you know that I think every episode at the end, Scooby and his gang have the bad guys in custody, and they pull off the masks, the rubber masks, and they find that it's really the bad guys underneath, and their true identity is revealed. In John chapter 18, we see a similar situation. We see the true identity of several biblical characters being revealed. And the first is Judas. John 18 verse 2 rather. Judas the betrayer. And just in those three words, we see indicated Judas's true identity. He knew the place because Jesus had often gone there with his disciples. Basically, Judas has identified the place where Jesus was going to be with his disciples so that Judas could betray Jesus to the authorities. His true identity is revealed. And it's sad because we can imagine the shame and remorse that Judas felt after he betrayed Jesus and ultimately hanged himself. But yet, as the Bible promises, God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called by his name. And God uses Judas's betrayal to bring about the single most important moment in all history, when Jesus would die for our sins. So Judas did a horrible, horrendous thing. His identity as betrayer was revealed. But yet we needed Judas in order for Jesus to do his work on the cross. Next, I'm going to skip ahead to a person who's in process. His identity is clearly in process, and this is Peter. We see two instances here. In verse 10, then Simon Peter drew a sword and slashed off the right ear of Malchus, the high priest's slave. And we see Judas here as impulsive and rash, and acting out without thinking, letting his emotions guide him. Later in verse 16, Peter had to stay outside the gate. Then the disciple who knew the high priest spoke to the woman watching at the gate, and she let Peter in. And then listen to this, 17, the woman asked Peter, "You're not one of the man's disciples, are you?" "No," he said, "I am not." And so there we see, this is Peter in process. Peter is later going to go on to be one of the heroes of the faith. In the book of Acts, he really lives into his name as the rock, as he establishes the church, as he defends Jesus publicly in beautiful, beautiful ways. But Peter's not there yet. He's in process, and he's trying to reconcile what's happening with Jesus, and he's not yet really knowing how to respond. And so he denies Jesus. And he acts rashly against the slave of the high priest. And so we see that he's in process. And lastly, we see the identity of Jesus finally revealed. Now, Jesus has been identifying himself throughout the whole gospel, but his truth has been obscured from the disciples. They don't truly know who he is yet. But look back now at verse 4, at the end of verse 4. Jesus says to his accusers, "Who are you looking for?" Verse 5, "Jesus the Nazarene," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. As Jesus said, "I am he," they all drew back and fell to the ground. In this moment, everything comes together, and Jesus uses his ancient biblical name that God used to reveal himself to Moses, "I am." He says, "I am he." And at that powerful name, everyone who's in the vicinity falls back as this force, the force of God himself is revealed, and they can't even stand in his presence. They fall to the ground out of their own control. Jesus' true identity is finally revealed. So we see three characters. We see the betrayer, we see the one in process, and we see the one who identifies himself as God himself. Where are you? Where do you identify yourself on the spectrum? Are you an enemy with God, as Judas was? Are you in process, as Peter was? And none of us are obviously the Messiah, but Are you one who is following in step with the Messiah, recognizing Jesus for who he is, and standing up for who he is, and showing his light to the world? Where are you? What's your true identity? May it be revealed to the world, and may you decide to be the one who is following Jesus with all your heart, and being that light into the world so that all would come to follow him as well. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time on the Cornerstone Connection.